Hello, I'm Christina Davis, the Director of the Program on U.S.-Japan Relations. Today, I'm very happy to welcome you to join us for a seminar presentation by Harvard Business School professor Hirotaka Takeuchi, who will discuss Smart Work X, Japan's transformation in the new normal. This event is co-sponsored by the Mosavar Ramani Center for Business and Government of the Harvard Kennedy School. Now, today's speaker, Professor Takeuchi, is well known to all of us. He has been a great supporter for the program of U.S.-Japan Relations. He's a legendary teacher of business strategy. His students include not only MBA students at Harvard, but also an incredible array of executives who learn from his executive education programs. His golf partners include executives of Uniqlo and many other leading companies. I was especially fortunate last January to attend a session of his executive education workshop in Tokyo with Japanese women executives, which was an incredible event, helping these women have an opportunity to learn from the best how to succeed in management in a program that's actually coordinated with Prime Minister Abe, trying to encourage more women's contribution to the workforce. Professor Takeuchi actually began with his BA at International Christian University, where I studied once for a year, but he has gone on from ICU undergraduate to now serve as the chair of the International Christian University Board of Trustees. He received his MBA and PhD from UC Berkeley, where he then taught briefly at Harvard before returning to Japan, where he was professor and became the founding dean of Graduate School of International Corporate Strategy. He was recruited back to Harvard in 2010 to serve as the professor of management practice and faculty chair for Japan. Professor Takeuchi has written so many books and articles, I cannot do justice in a brief introduction, but I would like to highlight a few. After Japan had suffered a decade of slow economic growth in the 1990s, he wrote a book in 2000 asking, can Japan compete? With an answer, yes, if it only chooses to do so. He then gave a close-up look with a book on one of Japan's most successful companies in a 2008 publication, Extreme Toyota, Radical Contradictions That Drive Success at the World's Best Manufacturer. Most recently, he is co-author with Ikujiro Nonaka of a 2019 Oxford Press book, The Wise Company, How Companies Create Continuous Innovation. We are all fortunate to have him here today to explain to us new approaches to Japanese business. Companies today are facing especially difficult economic environments. They have been shaken by trade wars, pandemic lockdowns, on top of what were already existing challenges to Japan from demographic pressures, adapting a Japanese model to a new information-driven digital economy where small, nimble startups are the center of innovation. So we often hear the words, unprecedented times. So how can Japan adapt? Well, 25 years ago, in one of his books that is commonly seen as a classic business management study that started the whole field of knowledge management, Professor Takeuchi wrote in the book, Knowledge Creating Company, How Japanese Companies Create the Dynamics of Innovation. The first sentences of the book, in an economy where only uncertainty is certainty, the one sure source of lasting competitive advantage is knowledge. With that sentence, his book in 1995 set forth a new way of studying knowledge innovation in Japanese companies. He's updated with The Wise Company, and today we get to hear the latest update on how companies learn and strategize. Smart Work X, Japan's transformation in the new normal. Now, normally I'd switch to announce next week's event, but next week's a holiday, so we will get to take the words of advice from Professor Hirotaka today, Professor Takeuchi today, and think of them over the full holiday break. Remind you to look at our Zoom etiquette, keep your microphone muted. We'll have a time for questions after the remarks. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to pass over to Professor Takeuchi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Christina. That was great. I wish my late mother was listening to your introduction. She would have been very proud of me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about Smart X. And X in Japan is now a very popular term because we talk of DX, digital transformation, right? And a couple of weeks ago, Professor Yamanaka and I did a session for the Japan Society of Boston, and he talked about Factor X, what he calls low technology factors that are helping Japan to overcome, or maybe not overcome, but at least get hold of the pandemic. I also did a session, if I can show the slide, a couple of months ago. Next slide, please. At Nikkei, Nihon Keizai Shimbun, where the symposium title was Smart Work X. So I took the title of my presentation today from this conference that I held a couple of months ago. 1,200 people attended. This was remote. So X has become kind of a popular word. Next slide, please. Especially during COVID-19, where I think the good news today is a historic day where the first Americans are going to be vaccinated. So, mark December 14th as D-Day for America. And next slide, the key word is survival. We are at the brink of asking ourselves, are we as human beings going to survive? And my research has always been the survival of companies. But Corona has kind of led me into thinking about survival of the human race. Basically, next slide, please. Last time, we humans were talking about survival was in 1950s and the 60s. This is when the US National Security Agency published a report in 1968. And the next slide, this is the actual report. As a 7-page report, basically saying, what are we going to do when the Martians are going to attack? So they had spottings of Martians in the 50s, early 60s. And so you see on the very bottom, they're talking about UFOs. And the scare back then is may not be able to survive. So the title of the presentation here, the 7-page report, it says secret and draft, but UFO hypotheses and survival questions. For me, 1968 has a lot of meaning because that was the first year I arrived in the United States. I was an exchange student to UC Berkeley. And so I remember that year very, very well. So let me give you the conclusion that the 7-page report gave, next slide, which is learn from the Japanese. So I was astonished, landed in Berkeley in the United States for the first time. And somebody hands me this report saying, hey, in order to deal with survival, we're supposed to learn from you guys. And there were 3 things that the report wrote. One is Japan had inferior technology, but boy, did they catch up fast. Number 2, they said they adopted all other cultures like you wouldn't believe very quickly without giving up their own identity. And the third was when something happens, people unite, national solidarity. So these were kind of the 3 things I took out from the report, the secret report from 1968. And let me show you some slides to show you, what 1, 2, and 3 visibly meant. So next slide. In 1964, the Shinkansen started, right? So when you talk of railroads, it was the UK, it was Switzerland, it was all the other countries. But boy, by 1968, this thing was running at 300 kilos per hour. So wow, they really had inferior technology, but caught up very quickly. The second one, next slide, is this thing called the smart toilet, right? So I take my students to Japan, 45 of them every year. And the first thing I have to do is give them a training on these smart toilets. Because right now there are about 8 buttons and they're like strong and weak, front and back. So altogether 16 combinations. So it's in every hotel, it's in every public toilet, it's even on Japan Airlines and ANA and on airlines. So, this is, we call this Yobanshiki, which is Western toilet, right? So we adopted Western toilets, but we had the sensitivity of making changes that will, we're very kind of cleanliness oriented. So this thing's been around for 40 years. And it's a good example of learning from abroad, but just keeping your identity. The last one in terms of national solidarity is the 1964 Olympics. So when this thing happened, you can see a Japanese looking guy way in the back, but this is when the Japanese said, we've got to unite, solidarity. We're kind of far behind the Western world. So I still remember back then I was a senior in high school and the rivers stunk. The trashes were all over the place, right? The smog was terrible, worse than, Beijing 10 years ago. And so because of the Olympics, we had the 100-meter roads, the air was cleaned up, the rivers were all cleaned up. So 1964 Olympics, in a sense, united the Japanese and said the old way ain't gonna go. We're gonna come up with, a new standard. So these are pretty good examples of the 3 reasons that NSA gave in terms of learning from the Japanese. So the next slide shows 2011 311. And again, I wrote a little piece, next slide, at the Harvard Business School Working Knowledge. And the title is, Why Japanese Businesses Are So Good at Surviving Crises. So again, it was a crisis back in 2011, but this was solidarity. We kind of united as, and we call it kizuna, right? So that was bonding that took place. And so, over history, we've had instances like this, the Tokyo Olympics and so forth, that kind of talks about national solidarity. So let me turn to the next slide, which is 2020. So can we actually, 20 years from now, look back at 2020 and say, wow, Japan really survived, not only survived, but the 3 reasons they survived were the 3 that I mentioned. So the first one, next slide, is full and honest acceptance of inferiorities. So right now, what Japan needs to do, and Professor Yamanaka said it very clearly, he said we have to learn high tech from the United States. And the United States has to learn low tech from Japan, washing hands, mask, goggling, the whole bit. So inferior. So the next slide is the famous DX slide. And every day now, you can see the word DX in the newspaper. So every Japanese know that this stands for digital transformation. But I've been sort of saying, no, this doesn't, X doesn't stand for transformation. It really stands for, next slide, デジタル我々ダメだよね。X ダメ。So we, if we now accept the fact, full and honest acceptance of our inferiorities, then I think we can make a contribution, just as we did in the 50s. But especially in government and in ministries, digital is dame, 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 dame. And so to me, DX, I think, has a different meaning. The other word that I often use, next slide, is AI. Of course, it translates to artificial intelligence. That's part of the new technology that we have to kind of catch up. But I translate this to, next slide, advantage inferior. So I was watching Osaka's game, tennis game, and the referee kept on talking advantage Osaka, right? So I said, oh, you know what? If we look at inferior as an advantage, that's what the Japanese did back in the 50s and the 60s. Maybe we can make a contribution. So let me show you an example of what I mean by advantage inferior. Next slide. So this is the MOOC at the Harvard Business School. We were late by 18 years to Stanford, who created MOOC, right? But we found out that the rate at which people complete MOOC is only single digit, 4%, 8%. And it's free, it's accessible, but they don't take it seriously. It's kind of boring. So what the Harvard Business School did, we were late by 15 years. So we said, maybe we can find technology that are 2 generations above, more sophisticated than that of Stanford, and we did. So today we can do a case study in a room like this with actually 90 students. And it leads to better discussion. It makes our job as instructors easier because everything is recorded. The worst thing for a professor in the case method is evaluating each student's contribution after class. After 80 minutes, we have to go back to our study, our office, and do the ABCD evaluation of every comment of the students. But this is all recorded. So lo and behold, we were so far behind, but advantage inferior. We jumped 2 generations of IT, and we can now offer this, the completion. So this is a special in-class setup, but something like MOOC that we do, we started selling the program for $1,500. The completion rate was 87%. When people pay for it, they want to make sure they complete it and get some kind of, either we don't get a degree out of it, but a sign saying you finished this program, some kind of credential, whatnot, right? And typical of Harvard, because it was so popular, a year and a half later, they jacked the price up to $2,400. Let me tell you, that's capitalism. But it works. And the reason this thing works is because Harvard jumped 2 generations. So maybe when we in 2040 look back and say, Japan is so far behind in digital in terms of AI, IoT, but because they were so far behind, they really did the double jump kind of thing. So right now, I'm kind of my storyline to the Japanese executives is to say, hey, inferior is advantage. So, just remember that. Next slide, I even go further. And I say, a lot of people talk about new normal, right? And my presentation title is also new normal. But I'm saying, hey, Japan, you have to go one step back and admit that you are abnormal. So go from abnormal to normal, and then you can go to new normal. So what do I mean by abnormal? So I'm, teaching at I used to teach at a Japanese government university. And there, we don't have September students. At ICU from 1953, since we started, September and, April, they coexisted. But in Japan, Todai doesn't do it. So nobody else does it, right? So we had an attempt this year, it failed. We had an attempt 6 years ago, that didn't happen, right? The other abnormal is a lot of my students now have kids, and they're saying, oh boy, getting into those juku, it's so expensive, it's so difficult. And I say, how much do you pay for an elementary kid, right, going to a juku? And they say 100 man, 150 man. That's how much they're paying. And I say, to do what? To get into Todai, where the tuition is 60 man, right? So in elementary school, these parents are sending their kids to Juku late at night, right? When they should be outside, not at night, but, they should be going camping. They should get, muddy. They should, get into all kinds of, tangle with nature. These are some of the things they should be doing, but they're, spending a lot of time not only attending Juku, but worrying about Jukutomo, making friends at Juku. That's to me abnormal, right? The 60 man tuition of Todai and Kyodai and Hitotsubashi, that's abnormal too, right? So there are lots of abnormal things that are still going on. The Hanko, of course, is abnormal, right? The company that I'm a board member, the CEO's photo appeared on first page of Nikkei. Why? He started Tsunen Saiyo. So the company started hiring on a regular basis throughout the year. So that makes first page of Nikkei. You have to kind of follow Keidanren rules a couple of years ago, right? And the hiring can only start in July, and from July to September kind of thing. That to me is abnormal, right? So I can go down the list of about 25 things that is abnormal in Japan. And so this is a great opportunity, the pandemic, to change that abnormal to global standard. So we need to do that first, and then go to the new normal, right? And a lot of it has to do with regulation. Too many regulations from the government, and that the companies are tied up, universities are tied up, unbelievable. So to me, we've got to kind of admit that, hey, we're abnormal before becoming new normal. So the second thing, next slide, please, is adopting from other cultures as fast as possible. So, every day you'll read the next slide in the Japanese newspaper, Hataraki kata kaikaku, right? So I'm going to go through 4 slides, which are all in English. We talk about, next slide, remote. We use, next slide, Zoom. We talk about job gata rather than membership gata. So you can come in anytime, exit anytime. but you really have to be a professional. It used to be enter from the bottom and exit when you retire, but now multiple entries, midstream, multiple exits, jobugata, right? D2C is the next one. This is direct to consumers. So all of a sudden, this is a big term. But I'm saying hataraki kata kaikaku is not what we should be looking for. What we should do is change one word in hataraki kata kaikaku. And that one word is, next slide, from kata to hito. So what we should be doing is actually do hataraki bito kaikaku. Because in Japan, the most underutilized asset we have are the youth, the young people, and women. So what we need to do is change the unfair practices vis-a-vis young people and women and bring them on board the mainstream. So if you're talking about digital transformation, we got to rely on the young people. So next slide is something that someone on the front right, ex-Harvard University student Ryosuke Kobayashi, who took, I think, one of your courses, started. It's called HLAB. So it stands for, originally it stood for Harvard Liberal Arts Beyond Borders. So 24 Harvard students 9 years ago went to Homeikan, this dirty old ryokan in Hongo near Todai, and taught 70 Japanese high school students basically whatever they excelled in liberal arts. So some taught math, some taught humanities, some taught whatever they were good at, right? So the intent was the guy in the front, two of them. So Ryosuke, when he first went to Harvard, he was the only Japanese out of the entering class of 1,400. Next year, Ogawa Yohei was the only Japanese among 1,400 entrants. And they said, there's something wrong here. So we got to do something to change the minds of Japanese high school students. And the only way to do it is, ayu oni-san, one-san ni naritai. I want to be like them, right? So if they experience the Harvard students, right, the depth of the liberal arts, they're going to say, hey, maybe I got accepted to ICU, to Todai, but maybe I should go to Grinnell. I should go to, maybe if I'm lucky, I'll go to Harvard, and better to Princeton, right, Christina? That was kind of the intent, and it's now in its 9th year. We started only in Tokyo, but it's spread to 4 cities, and HLAB is now a phenomenon. So these high schoolers are really, just moving, from the only choice they had, which was Todai, to liberal arts education in the United States. And the next slide is Harvard Business School teaches women executives. And Christina was good enough to visit one of the classes last year. So Prime Minister Abe came to the Harvard Business School and said, can the Harvard Business School do an executive program for women executives only? And we said, yes. We've been sending, including myself, 3 professors to teach classes, cases there. And what's very, very unique about these women is when Prime Minister starts talking, and every year we've had 70 executives. They all rush to the front of where Prime Minister is speaking, pull out their smartphones and start taking photos. Men don't do that, let me tell you, right? And the Prime Minister is scheduled, and he appeared every year for the last 4 years, right? And he his lieutenants would say, Prime Minister will have 25 minutes and he will leave. Every year he stayed for 45 minutes, 50 minutes. because the women would not let him go home. They surround him and these are the teams they were on. So there were like, 10 of them just crowding around the prime minister. And prime minister has a very good sense of humor. He would say, 20 minutes ago, I was in the diet, and that was fake smile, but this is real smile, and the behavior of women when they become a majority, totally different than when they are a minority. So this is one of the most talented bunch of people who, because of unequal practices in HR, can't get into the boards. There's only 4% women on Japanese boards, and many of them are outside board members. But we should be promoting these people. So I'm very passionate about this. But the next slide is very important. We ought to take on, learn from the outside while maintaining our own identity. This is key. And the biggest identity for Japan, next slide, is actually small and medium-sized enterprises. So if you count the number of companies, right, over 95% are small and medium-sized enterprises. And there are tons of good stories and cases we've written on these small and medium-sized enterprise. One example stands out. So there was a company in Yamanashi who are making covers for CDs, plastic covers, right? And CDs were kind of dying out. But when Corona came full force, they said, you know what? We should switch from CD to face masks. And that is using the same material. And what's amazing is in 1 week, they were able to come with a prototype. In a week and a half, they were going mass production of the masks. So on the agility that these guys have, the flexibility of the small and medium-sized enterprises, that's really where a lot of the small innovations take place in Japan. So the next slide is the Japan Society of Boston slide, in which Yamanaka-san and Kurokawa-san appeared. And I already told you the punchline, but Yamanaka-san was talking about, hey, Americans, emulate our low tech. So, some of the practices we do at home, washing and taking our shoes off, this and that, those things are essential to overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's, basically trying to maintain our identity of cleanliness and this. So one of the first things Harvard Business School students notice when they land at train stations and whatnot, they say, Professor, why are there no trashes? And more importantly, why are there no trash cans? And I tell them, hey, people bring them home. They said, so those are low-tech stuff, but something that the U.S. should learn from. The last thing, the third one, is national solidarity. So let me show you the next slide. And I talked about the 1964 Olympics, right? So double whammy for 2020. We had the pandemic, and we were supposed to have the 2020 Olympics. So when you look at the next slide, right, this is the logo for the 2020 Olympics. So I asked all my students, well, what does this remind you of? What does this symbolize? And they talk about harmony. They talk about simplicity, empathy, right? So these are some of the insights they get from looking at this logo. So I'm a big believer of the 1964 Olympics and the 2020 Olympics because, let me show you the next two slides. In 1964, I was the official interpreter for the Tokyo Olympics. I was a senior in high school, but I said, once in a lifetime, I'm going to cut classes for a month and a half. And I did this. This year, next slide, I volunteered to be an interpreter again for the second time for the 2020 Olympics. So now you know why I'm so devoted to the Olympics. But this is something that actually changed Japan in 1964. And I'm hoping that when 20 years from now, we will say, you know what we learned from the Japanese? Next slide. Harmony. Next slide. Civility. Next slide. Collaboration. Next slide. Kyosei, living together. Next slide. Kyokan, empathy. And the best example of empathy that I saw was when I visited Shirakawa-go this fall. Let me show you the slide. And this is called Yui, musubu word, kekkonshiki no ketsu. And we read it as Yui. And what they do is every once in 20, 30 to 40 years, right, depending on the size of the house, everyone in the village assembles early in the morning and starts changing the yawabuki from the top, right, the straw, and in one day completely change the roofing. So this is probably the best example of kyosei and kyokan, right? Only happens in Japan. So I'm hoping that when they come to for the Olympics next year, they will go to Shirakawa-go and watch this and say, wow, is this how the Japanese live, right? So empathy according to Fusao, is translated as, next slide, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, right? That, I think, is one of the key values that we can teach the world. How do we put ourselves in someone else's shoes? And probably one of the best examples of that is in Kyocera, next slide, where they do the kompa. So this is in Kyushu, and they do it on tatami so that people can move around. They spill their guts, and this is putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Your title doesn't matter, your age doesn't matter, your gender doesn't matter. People talk the honne while eating good stuff. And this was done by Inamori-san, next slide. And that's when he did the same thing at Japan Airlines. So, he did kompa at Japan Airlines, 100 yen, bring your beer and your surume, and, people spilled their guts. And that's why they did the V turnaround in 3 months. Amazing, amazing. So I'm going to show you a couple of other slides, and I only have about 7 more slides, so I will end in about 5 minutes. So this is 2011, right after the tsunami. This is Yakult lady up front. So our students were following the Yakult lady for half a day. And they said, why do Yakult ladies, when they go visit the old ladies, get a present? The old lady says, kore motte kinasai, and give her a little gift. And they found out that when 3/11 took place, Yakult had nothing to deliver. So the Yakult lady said, well, people are suffering. This is survival time. What we ought to do is go bring water and instant ramen to these people. That's what they did, free. So the old ladies, never forgot that. And whenever they come once a week, they will say, kore motte kinasai. This to me is empathy. Next slide is eizai, where they're told every one of them, even if they're researchers, salespeople, have to spend time with the elderly and not only the patient, but their family. This is a must. So putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So that's what I'm hoping that the world would learn from Japan. And I'm going to skip a couple of slides. Please skip the next one. Go to the next one. Go to the next one. Go to the next one. We say in our new book, people ask, what's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? So knowledge is of no value until you put it into practice. And wisdom, the best way to remember it is mother's wisdom. In Japanese, we say, "Oba-chan no chiebukuro," grandmother's, wisdom bag. And the difference between knowledge and wisdom is knowledge becomes obsolete the minute the second it is created. But wisdom lingers on. It passes on to generation. So, everybody probably can think of something your mother told you. And I remembered yesterday when I was clipping my nails at night, and I said, oh yeah, no, my mother told me never to clip your nails at night. That's one of mother's wisdom, right? But what's interesting is when you ask the Japanese for, tell me one thing you remember from your mother, they will all talk about 人に迷惑をかけるな, 人に this and that, right? So it's all about empathy. So with that, let me stop and maybe go to the next slide because skip this, this one, because we've written an article in the Harvard Business Review on Wise Leader. We wrote the book on Wise Company. I got an order from Jiro Nonaka, my co-author. The next book, he says, is going to be on Wise Capitalism. So he's 85 years old. He's energetic like hell. And he gave me this order yesterday and saying, hey, how far along are you on that new book? So pressure's on me. Let me stop there.
Thank you so very much for remarkable comments. And I will be the first to pre-order your book on Wise Capitalism. And it's really encouraging that today we can think of possibilities, that there's inferior advantage, mother knows best.
Yes.
And your words of hope will be very important. I'd like to turn over to the question and answer period, which will be led off by our Associate US-Japan Program Postdoctoral Fellow, Charlie McLean.
Hi, Professor Takeuchi. Thanks so much for your fascinating presentation.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah.
I was wondering, you touched on it a little bit, but I was wondering if I could ask you about remote work in Japan and the extent to which you see it sort of transforming that work culture you were talking about.
Yeah.
So on the positive side, it could give sort of flexibility to people, and maybe the Suga government is all about rural revitalization, so it can encourage people to move outside Tokyo, and they're even offering money. So I'd be curious too if like Japanese businesses are viewing remote work. Are they largely embracing it? Are they opposed to it? So any of your thoughts on remote work would be great. Thank you.
Remote is going to have a tremendous impact on Japan. Because one of the abnormalities of the Japanese business scene is commuting an hour and a half on the Gyugyu Densha, right? That's normal in Japan. But globally, that's abnormal, right? So the reason for that is everything centralized in downtown locations, right? And thanks to the corona, we are now very much into remote, and vacation is something they kind of came up with a cute word, combining vacation and work, right? And so you can be at Mount Fuji, right, doing as productive a work as you would be riding on those crowded trains. Now it's also having a tremendous impact on land prices. So center of town, the prices are going down 7% in the middle of Tokyo. So it's gonna turn into abnormalities turning to normalities. So a lot of my students who from the Harvard Business School are going into real estate because they see a great opportunity for Japan to revitalize its real estate. And so people are now flocking to outside of Tokyo, outside of Osaka, to remote places. And we have so much beauty, right? You looked at Shirakawa-go. I mean, it's so beautiful out there. The greens, 80% of the land in Japan are greenery, right? So people are saying, hey, this is not bad. And so I think when you look back, in 2040, when you look back and say, wow, did we change the way we were? And that's thanks to remote. So I don't know if I answered your question, Charles.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Next, we have our associate from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, Nozomi Suzuki, who would like to ask a question.
Hi.
Yeah. My name is Nozomi Suzuki, and I'm an associate of the USA-Japan program. I'm from Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan. Thank you very much, Dr. Takeuchi, for your positive and wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And now, my question is about what is said about national solidarity. As you know, Japanese society is now facing a serious stratification with the separation of regular employees and temporary workers and the acceptance of foreign workers. What I fear is that the common value of each person will become smaller and smaller, and that national solidarity will become weaker and weaker. In order to strengthen this national solidarity, I'd like to ask you more about what is necessary for business owners and what is necessary for government.
Okay. Good question. But maybe my use of the word national solidarity, it comes straight out of this article. So that's what I used it. But in Japanese, we say, なんかがあったときにみんなが団結する. So the actual translation should have been, when something happens, the Japanese tend to unite. And the example I gave was, the crisis of Tohoku at 3.11, and the survival crisis with the UFO. And so the Olympics to me was something that happened, right? And people said, we got to do something because we're going to have the 1964 Olympics. The Kandagawa smelled like hell, and boy, the gomi situation was terrible. So that's when they all got together, and just like the Yui in Shirakawa-go, right? People connected. So I think your question is more structural than that, because this is something, when something happens, we unite, kind of thing. And yours is kind of structural because of remote, we have kind of the separation between the regular workers and the temporary workers, as well as the foreign workers, right? So that was your point. Let me tell you, it's all relative, because 1968 was the year when I first visited the United States, right? That was the year Martin Luther King was assassinated. So I remember that vividly. And when, I mentioned Osaka, Naomi, because of the mask that she was wearing. And today, even, there are banners all over the place, right? Black Lives Matter. The have and the have-nots situation. I don't think has improved significantly in the United States. So yes, there's an income gap between the regular workers and the temporary workers. And there's also some bias towards foreign workers, but it's all relative. So, I'm kind of looking at the United States and saying, boy, this divisiveness is killing this country. And at least I don't see the divisiveness that I witnessed in 1968 and is still lingering here in the United States back home. So yes, coming from Meti, you should be kind of trying to ease the have versus the have-not problem. But Japan is normal, in my opinion, on that score. And my sense is the United States, we're still struggling with that problem.
And we have a question from Jeremy Baima. If you could introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy. I'm currently a student through the extension school, but I've been living in Japan for the past couple of years. So.
Okay.
Oh, my question. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. You were just going to introduce yourself.
I thought it was an introduction.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
I'm currently working on a capstone for Master in Public Administration on Japan and foreign workers. And so my question is, what do you think can be done to ensure the long-term state of the foreign workers and the success? Because, with the population decline, they're like, yeah, we should depend on foreign workers, but they can never quite seem to keep those workers long enough for it to pay off. They keep talking about how the payoff is in the second and third generation that actually stays there. So I'm wondering what your opinion is on this.
Okay, yeah, I have a pretty pointed opinion on this. When I first landed in Japan, after teaching 7 years at the Harvard Business School, the nickname I got at Hitotsubashi University was ET, extraterrestrial. This guy is not from this world. He's from out there. When I became the chair of the board of trustees at ICU, my alma mater, the nickname they gave me was Kikakugai. So out of the norm. So I tend to have very strong opinions on certain issues, and this, you've hit it right on the spot. This is something that's irking me for ages, something we have not done, anything substantive, right? So yes, we tried bringing in the Brazilians, and they now have a town near Shinjuku where all the Brazilians assemble this and that, right? But they really have not assimilated. They really have not have done the kyokan that I'm talking about. And I am frustrated as hell on that. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't think we should leave it up to the government. I think this should be a social impact project for companies. And one company that I know very well that's doing it extremely well is Uniqlo. So, if you have a CEO like Yanai-san, right, who sees the problem and says, we got to do something about this, right? It gets done, and he's hiring non-Japanese left and right, right? The next CEO could be a Chinese person, as far as I'm concerned. So I think businesses should be the primary institution changing this policy, not relying on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, not relying on other ministries. So thank you very much, but this can be solved by private initiatives, not public initiatives.
Irv Plotkin, if you could ask a brief question and introduce yourself.
I do. The professor knows me well, we're neighbors.
Yes. I heard.
I was wondering that your thoughts about how the continuing rise of China and the Japanese-Chinese relationship fit into this matrix you've spoken of.
Okay, you should have asked that question to Ezra because I'm not a China expert at all. But you know what? I'm talking about ICU, but it has some relevance to Japan. ICU was founded in 1953 because of the charity of the American Christians. So on Sunday, when they go to church, they chipped in $1 or $2, 10, 5, right? That throughout the United States got assembled and was sent to Japan for, this is in 1948. Japan ICU Foundation was built. So this is like 5 years before the school was built. We received that from the United States, an American by the name of Diffendorfer was all behind this. The guy who received it in Japan was the head of Bank of Japan, and he said, "Wow, they're sending a very clear message. They want Japan to have a democracy. They want Japan to work for peace. They want Japan." And so, they basically said, ICU, you've got to be a mediator. And right now, with the relationship with China, right? And the worsening relationship between China and the US, right? My hope is that Japan can should play the mediator role. So we understand the Chinese culturally. So we borrowed a lot of our cultural traditions from China. And we adore the Americans too. We are so grateful to the United States. ICU is so grateful to the American Christians for creating the University of Tomorrow. So we have relationships to both countries, and I think we would be in a lot better position than Taiwan or Korea or India or any of those nations to play the mediator role. And I'm hoping with the new prime minister, he is headed that way. I think, as much as I liked Abe, prime minister, he was kind of leaning more towards the United States, more towards Trump, but now I think we have a prime minister who kind of understands the strategic role Japan can play in terms of being a mediator.
Arigato.
Thank you for the bread that you brought over, that Janet brought over yesterday. Thank you so much.
I'm glad we can unite neighbors through Zoom today.
Yes, we neighbors are united now.
I get to ask the final closing question.
Sure.
Many of your remarks suggest some skepticism of the role for government. That regulations are the problem for companies. I agree with you, the government has not necessarily taken the lead on foreign labor integration. But you sounded a little more optimistic about Prime Minister Suga. And so I would like to know, do you think that the effort by Prime Minister Suga to promote digital governance and the transition to digital economy will have a positive role by government? Or do you remain convinced that it is the firms that have to?
No, I grew up thinking that the people like Suzuki-san were the heroes of Japan. Because if you go back to why did Japan really rise in the 60s and the 70s, it was MITI at that time, right? The former MITI. That created the they talked about the vision of the 60s, the vision of the 70s, the vision of the 80s. They were very smart people, the creme de creme, who became strategists for Japan. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you had people who were smart, respectable, so I still have tremendous respect for ministries. When I say government, it's usually ministries. But when I started working for Hitotsubashi, 27 years at a national university, I found out how second-class ministries are horrible in terms of making policy. So I have firsthand experience working with incompetent bureaucrats. And so that has made a strong imprint on me for 27 years. I had to kind of deal with the Ministry of Education that, oh boy, they were so far behind on everything, right? So with that in mind, when you kind of look at the recent government, Abe-san had 3 METI people as his right-hand man. And so, he was doing the Abenomics as a result of I think a lot of wise wisdom coming from the METI people. And so I think he utilized their expertise very well. But Tsuga-san, I think, is a different creature. And he's much, much more down to earth. He is not an elite, so he listens well. And, the digital ministry that he created, that's, he does it, right? And, to me, the most stunning thing is giving Taro Kono, one of your graduates, right, the lead role. I mean, he's seen as a crazy man among the politicians, but he's going to get things done. So my sense is he really understands the dynamics of how things get done. So the book that I wrote was all about practice, right? And he has practical wisdom, in my opinion. So I wasn't so sure, whether he would become a leader or not. But maybe he's the kind of leader Japan really needs right now to make that the transformation.
Great. I hope you were right. That is a vision for a future with a little more optimism. And
okay.
So thank you very much for an incredible range of remarks. We hope that Japan's simple technology of masks and clean hygiene, its advanced technology of high-speed rail, and the transformation to digital economy will all benefit us.
Oh yeah, but today is a historic day, right? The first American to be vaccinated, December 14th.
And the Electoral College votes.
Yes, that too.
On that note, thank you very much. We appreciate all of you joining us.
Thank you.